Have you ever realized the man you married is a stranger? My husband and his mother thought power meant changing the locks and draining the accounts. They tossed me and my 4-year-old twins out, assuming a broke, dependent mother would quietly disappear so he could upgrade to a wealthier life. They were entirely wrong. The empire they thought they built was just a fragile house of cards, and I held the match. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, our channel has been completely demonetized by YouTube, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you find today's story engaging, please kindly support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel, where you can listen to exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer, and feature highly detailed situations we simply cannot make public on YouTube, all brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors in a single story. You can join by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon channel link in the description or the comments section of this video. Now, let us begin today's story and meet our main character, Kinsley Harrison. Austin, Texas, has a peculiar way of masking its cruelty behind a shimmering veneer of Southern hospitality and new money. In our neighborhood, the lawns were perfectly manicured, the driveways boasted imported luxury vehicles, and the smiles exchanged over crystal champagne flutes were as hollow as the people wearing them. At 31 years of age, I, Kinsley Harrison, was a ghost haunting my own marriage. I was an independent virtual reality game developer. My days were spent in the quiet sanctuary of my home office, wearing faded vintage tees and comfortable sweatpants, meticulously coding digital worlds. I was completely alienated in the glittering, superficial high society that my husband worshipped. My husband, Julian, was an ambitious real estate development director whose entire existence revolved around climbing the social ladder. He was consumed by an insatiable hunger to secure a permanent seat among the ultra-rich elite of Texas. To Julian, everything was a transaction, an asset, or a stepping stone. And somewhere along the way, I had shifted from being his partner to becoming a liability. I did not care for the country club galas, the superficial charity auctions, or the exhausting game of pretending we had more wealth than we actually possessed. But Julian did not arrive at this conclusion entirely on his own. He had a co-pilot in his descent into absolute arrogance. His mother, Beatrice. Beatrice was a woman carved from bitter, aristocratic ice. She never missed an opportunity to remind me of my modest, middle-class upbringing. Her sneers were subtle but lethal. Whenever Julian was within earshot, she would casually drop venomous remarks, disguised as maternal concern. "Julian, darling," she would say, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You are carrying such a heavy load for this family. It is a shame your wife lacks the pedigree to stand beside you at these crucial networking events. A man of your caliber needs an asset, not an anchor." She tirelessly poisoned his mind, convincing him that my lack of interest in designer labels and elite gossip was actively destroying his career trajectory. And Julian, desperate for her approval and blinded by his own greed, drank the poison willingly. The warmth in our marriage evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, silent hostility. I felt the cold drafts in our sprawling mansion long before the actual storm hit. The only warmth left in that massive, echoing house came from my 4-year-old twins. They were bright, endlessly witty, and bursting with vibrant health. Their laughter was the only sound that made the oppressive atmosphere bearable. They were my lifeline, the sole reason I swallowed my pride, bit my tongue, and endured the chilling indifference of the man I once loved. I convinced myself that keeping the family intact was worth the daily emotional isolation. I thought I could survive the frost as long as my children had a stable home. I was spectacularly naive. It happened on a blistering Tuesday afternoon. The temperature was pushing 95 degrees, and the air was thick with humidity. I had just brought the twins back from a long, exhausting, but joyful trip to the neighborhood park. Their faces were flushed, their little hands sticky with melted fruit popsicles. We walked up the grand stone pathway of our home, and I reached for the front door handle. It did not yield. I frowned, Typing my usual passcode into the sleek, digital smart lock panel, a harsh red light flashed, accompanied by an aggressive buzz. Access denied. I tried again, typing slower this time. Red light, buzz. I tried Julian's master code. Red light, buzz. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. The entire smart home security system had been wiped and reset. I was effectively locked out of the home I had helped build. Before panic could fully set in, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text message from Julian. The words on the screen were clinical, sharp, and utterly devoid of humanity. The locks have been changed. Your belongings will be sent to a storage unit tomorrow. Do not attempt to enter the property. You are no longer welcome here. All joint credit cards and banking accounts have been completely frozen as of 1 hour ago. Have your lawyer contact mine. I stood there on the sweltering porch, staring at the glowing screen. The man I had sworn to spend my life with had just erased me with the push of a button, leaving me and our 2 children stranded on the doorstep with absolutely nothing. I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the stifling Texas heat, and forced the muscles in my face to form a bright, convincing smile. Panic was a luxury I simply could not afford, not with my children sitting just a few yards away. I turned my back on the massive oak doors of the mansion and briskly walked back to our vehicle. I climbed into the driver's seat, turning to look at their flushed, expectant faces in the rearview mirror. Guess what, guys? I announced, infusing my voice with exaggerated excitement. The house is broken right now, so we are going on a super-secret hotel adventure game tonight. Whoever jumps on the hotel bed first wins. They erupted into cheers, their innocent joy completely shielding them from the catastrophic reality crashing down around us. I put the car in drive, but before my foot could even touch the gas pedal, a sleek silver sedan aggressively blocked my path in the driveway. A man stepped out. I recognized him instantly. It was Richard, the ruthless corporate attack dog Julian called a lawyer. Richard approached my window. I rolled it down just enough to hear him, keeping the air conditioning blasting so the children would not catch the scent of tension. He did not offer a greeting. Instead, he shoved a thick, heavy manila envelope through the narrow gap. It landed on my lap with a heavy thud. "Julian is willing to be generous," Richard stated, his voice flat and mechanical. "Sign the custody waiver inside that packet, relinquish all parental rights, and he will authorize a modest monthly stipend so you do not end up on the streets. If you try to fight him, you will be crushed. He will drag this out until you are entirely broken." He turned on his heel and walked away before I could utter a single syllable. I rolled the window up, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I drove us away from the only home my children had ever known, pulling into a quiet parking lot miles down the road to assess the damage. While the twins watched a cartoon on my phone, I logged into my mobile banking application. The loading circle spun for what felt like hours. When the dashboard finally appeared, my stomach dropped. The joint checking account read $0. The high-yield savings account read $0. I quickly checked my personal email, frantically searching through the clutter. There it was. An automated notification from our health insurance provider, sent 3 days ago, confirming that my coverage had been permanently canceled. Julian had not just locked me out. He had spent the last week methodically erasing my financial existence, pushing me to the absolute edge of a very steep cliff. I managed to secure a room at a modest highway motel, using a stash of emergency cash I kept hidden in the glove compartment for rainy days. It was a far cry from the luxury we were accustomed to, but the kids were thrilled by the novelty of the tiny soap bars and the cable television. Once they were deeply asleep, their soft breathing filling the dim room. I finally opened the thick legal packet. A sharp knock at the door startled me. I looked through the peephole and sighed in relief. It was Marcus. Marcus was a brilliant corporate litigator and, more importantly, a former close friend who had been viciously stabbed in the back by Julian during a commercial real estate deal 2 years prior. We had stayed in touch discreetly. I let him in. He took one look at the dingy motel room, the sleeping children, and the sprawling legal documents on the small desk. Word travels incredibly fast in the Austin elite circles, Marcus whispered, taking a seat on the edge of the stiff armchair. Julian made absolutely sure everyone at his firm knew he kicked you out today, but I know exactly why he is doing this right now, and why he is going for the throat on custody. I crossed my arms, waiting. He is launching a campaign for the City Planning Council next month, Marcus explained, leaning forward. That position holds the keys to zoning laws that could save his failing development projects. But to win over the conservative voting base here, he needs a flawless family image. Or, even better, he needs to play the ultimate victim. He wants to campaign as the tragic, devoted single father who stepped up to protect his children from an unstable, financially reckless mother who abandoned her family. He needs to take the kids from you to complete the narrative. I looked down at the divorce agreement, at the signature line demanding I surrender my flesh and blood for a meager paycheck. The audacity of it did not bring tears to my eyes. It did not make me want to pick up the phone and beg my husband for mercy. Instead, a strange, profound sense of calm washed over me. I looked back at Marcus and allowed a cold, genuine smile to spread across my face. I picked up the thick stack of legal threats Julian had so carefully prepared. With deliberate precision, I ripped the documents perfectly in half. Then I stacked the halves and tore them again, letting the shredded pieces fall like snow into the cheap plastic trash can beside the desk. I was done playing the naive wife, and I was about to show Julian exactly what a real ruthless strategy looked like. The motel room was suffocatingly quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the ancient wall air conditioning unit. Marcus watched me with a mixture of concern and mild confusion as I reached into the bottom of my frayed canvas tote bag. I pulled out my laptop. It was a bulky, scratched machine that looked like it had barely survived a decade of hard use. Julian used to mock this device mercilessly, claiming it was an eyesore that perfectly represented my supposed lack of ambition. To him, and certainly to Beatrice, I was nothing more than a failed freelance coder, a woman playing with video games in the spare bedroom, while the real adults handled the serious business of the world. I flipped the battered lid open. The screen flickered to life, illuminating the dim room with a stark blue glow. I bypassed the standard operating system entirely, launching a hidden command prompt. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in a sequence of complex commands that executed a secure, military-grade, 256-bit encrypted portal. The worn exterior of this machine was nothing but a physical firewall, a brilliant disguise for the powerhouse processing unit hidden inside. "What exactly are we doing, Kinsley?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice to a hushed whisper so as not to wake the children. "If we are going to fight Julian for custody, we need a solid financial strategy. Tearing up those papers was dramatic, but tomorrow morning, you are still legally locked out and flat broke." "I am not broke, Marcus," I replied softly, my eyes fixed on the loading screen. "Julian thinks power is loud. He thinks power is changing the locks, driving a German sports car, and yelling at waiters, but real power is entirely silent." The encrypted portal finally authenticated my biometric scan. A sleek, highly classified corporate dashboard materialized on the screen. The logo in the top corner read, "Novasphere Interactive." It was a boutique virtual reality development studio I had built entirely from the ground up, operating under a dense web of shell companies and non-disclosure agreements. While Julian was busy schmoozing local politicians and running his real estate firm into the ground, I had been designing a revolutionary haptic feedback engine that caught the attention of the largest entertainment conglomerate on the West Coast. I opened my secure inbox and clicked on the top email. The subject line was simple, but it carried the weight of absolute victory: final acquisition approval and disbursement. I turned the laptop so Marcus could see the screen. He leaned in, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. Then, his gaze locked onto the highlighted financial figures at the bottom of the document. He stopped breathing for a full 5 seconds. "Kinsley," Marcus choked out, his voice cracking. "Is this real? Are you telling me this corporation just bought your little side project for $45 million? It was never a little side project, I corrected him, feeling a surge of pure, unfiltered triumph racing through my veins. And yes, it is very real. The acquisition cleared regulatory hurdles this morning. The final wire transfer is scheduled to hit my private, offshore corporate accounts in exactly 72 hours. Marcus slumped back into his chair, running a hand over his face. A slow, incredulous laugh escaped his lips. The sheer magnitude of the situation was settling over him. Then, the brilliant legal mind inside him caught up to the timeline. His eyes widened, shining with a sudden, predatory gleam. "Wait," Marcus said, sitting bolt upright. "Julian filed the preliminary separation papers today. He locked you out today. He completely drained the joint marital accounts and canceled your insurance today. He legally established the date of financial separation as of this afternoon, completely cutting you off." "Exactly," I said, a dangerous smile touching my lips. "Julian was in such a frantic rush to throw me out on the street that he legally severed our financial ties before the acquisition became public record. If he had waited just one more week, he would have been legally entitled to 50% of that $45 million under Texas community property laws. But by trying to leave me with absolutely nothing, he inadvertently forfeited his right to a massive fortune. He played himself, a victim of his own ruthless impatience and staggering arrogance. He threw away the winning lottery ticket because he thought the paper it was printed on looked cheap. We need to move fast, I instructed, closing the laptop and turning to face Marcus fully. I need you to act as my proxy. Take $50,000 from my reserve business account and hire the most ruthless but aggressive private investigation firm you know. I want absolute ghosts. I want them following Julian 24 hours a day. Marcus nodded, pulling a notepad from his suit jacket. What are we looking for? Everything, I commanded. Julian is arrogant, but he is not stupid enough to blow up his marriage and launch a political campaign in the exact same week without a desperate reason. The math does not make sense. He is hiding something massive. I want his offshore accounts investigated. I want his real estate project ledgers pulled apart. I want to know exactly who he is meeting, who he owes money to, and what he is so terrified of. The fear and helplessness that had threatened to consume me earlier in the day were completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I was no longer a stranded housewife begging for scraps. I was a CEO sitting on an invisible empire, and I was going to use every single cent to dismantle the man who tried to break me. It took exactly 48 hours for the private investigators to completely dismantle the grand illusion of my husband. Marcus arrived at the new, heavily secured luxury apartment I had discreetly leased under a corporate pseudonym, carrying a sleek black briefcase. The cheap motel was already a thing of the past. He set the leather case on my glass dining table and quickly clicked the silver latches open. Out poured a mountain of glossy surveillance photographs, leaked bank statements, and encrypted flash drives. "You were absolutely right to be suspicious," Marcus said, pulling up a chair and unbuttoning his suit jacket. "Julian is not just temporarily low on cash. He is drowning in a catastrophic level of toxic debt." I picked up the first stack of financial ledgers. The numbers, printed in glaring red ink, painted a pathetic and desperate picture. Julian's flagship commercial real estate project, the exact one he had bragged about at every cocktail party for the last 2 years, was a colossal failure. The city zoning permits had been permanently denied. The construction was halted indefinitely, and his primary investors had pulled their funding out 6 months ago. He currently owed 3 different banks a combined total of $22 million. His personal assets were leveraged to the absolute maximum limit. The elite Texas lifestyle he and Beatrice so proudly flaunted was entirely funded by high-interest, short-term bridge loans. Their prestigious family name was currently standing on the crumbling edge of total bankruptcy. "So, why the sudden rush to kick me out this exact week?" I asked, scanning a bank statement that showed a series of frantic transfers trying to cover merely the interest payments. Marcus slid a glossy 8x10 photograph across the smooth glass table. It showed Julian sitting at a candlelit table in an exclusive five-star restaurant, leaning intimately toward a stunning younger woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive silk dress. "Meet Victoria," Marcus announced, his tone laced with heavy disgust. "She is 26 years old and happens to be the youngest daughter of Richard Sterling, one of the most ruthless and wealthy property billionaires in the entire state of Texas. Her family controls an empire worth over $3 billion. The scattered pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into a clear, horrifying picture. Julian did not just want to get rid of a wife he found boring, he desperately needed a financial savior, and he had targeted the ultimate prize. By marrying Victoria, he would instantly gain access to the massive Sterling family capital, wiping out his crippling debts overnight and securing the elite social status he endlessly craved. But to land a billionaire heiress, he had to be completely unattached, and he had to do it fast, before his creditors publicly foreclosed on his entire life. I plugged one of the small flash drives into my laptop. It contained hidden audio files captured by a long-range microphone the investigators had cleverly positioned near Beatrice's usual table at the country club. I clicked play on a recording dated just 2 days ago. Beatrice's shrill, aristocratic voice filled the quiet room. "Oh, Victoria, my sweet dear," she cooed, sounding entirely heartbroken and fragile. "Julian has suffered so terribly much. His wife simply lost her mind. She became completely unhinged, abandoning her family and aggressively draining his personal savings accounts to fund her irresponsible, chaotic lifestyle. My poor son is working day and night to provide a stable, loving environment for those precious twins while dealing with the severe trauma of a runaway wife." I felt a cold, sharp flash of pure anger wash over my chest. They had not merely kicked me out onto the street, they were actively, maliciously assassinating my character. They had orchestrated a flawless theatrical performance for Victoria and her wealthy family, painting me as a financially abusive, deadbeat mother, and elevating Julian as the noble, suffering patriarch holding it all together. Marcus handed me the final document, a heavily redacted draft of a prenuptial agreement. "This is the true masterpiece," he said grimly. Julian had his lawyer draft this specific proposal for the Sterling family attorneys. I read through the legal clauses, the blood in my veins turning to absolute ice. Julian was demanding a massive, non-refundable cash injection into his failing holding company immediately upon signing the marriage certificate. But the most sickening part was the public relations strategy formally embedded in the contract. He explicitly outlined a detailed plan to use full, exclusive custody of my twins as a strategic marketing tool. The agreement stipulated that the children would feature prominently in his upcoming political campaign advertisements, solidifying his public image as the ultimate dedicated single father. He fully intended to parade my flesh and blood in front of the television cameras to win cheap sympathy votes and to definitively prove to Victoria's powerful father that he was a highly stable, family-oriented investment. He wanted to sell my children for a catchy campaign slogan and a corporate bailout check. "We have more than enough evidence to utterly destroy him in court right now," Marcus urged, tapping his finger hard against the table. "We can take these documents to the family court judge tomorrow morning, expose the massive financial fraud, and secure full custody before he even announces his political candidacy." I looked down at the photograph of Julian smiling smugly at his wealthy new target. Exposing him immediately would only result in a quiet, embarrassing settlement. He would scramble, file for bankruptcy protection, and slink away into the shadows to find another vulnerable victim. That outcome was entirely unacceptable. "No," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly steady. "If we strike him right now, he simply falls off a curb. I want him to fall off a skyscraper." I gathered the photographs and meticulously placed them back into the dark leather briefcase. I currently possess the immense financial power, the hidden, ugly truth, and the deadly element of total surprise. I was not going to interrupt his grand, desperate ascent. I was going to let Julian and Beatrice actively build their beautiful, fraudulent house of cards all the way up to the absolute top, I would let them deeply taste the sweet victory, let them stand proudly at the altar of their own boundless arrogance, and only then, I would become the sudden hurricane that tore the entire structure down to dust. The first move in any successful ambush is convincing your enemy that they have already won. I instructed Marcus to draft a carefully worded email to Richard. Julian's aggressive attorney, the tone needed to be perfectly pathetic. I wrote that I was exhausted, overwhelmed by the reality of my situation, and terrified of losing my children entirely. I asked if Julian would consider raising the monthly stipend by a mere $2,000 if I agreed to sign the preliminary custody waiver without a courtroom battle. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Less than 4 hours later, Marcus received a smug reply. Julian agreed to the meager increase, practically salivating at the prospect of a swift, unopposed victory. Beatrice probably celebrated with an expensive bottle of wine, entirely convinced that the impoverished, naive girl she always despised had finally surrendered to her rightful place in the gutter. By playing dead, I ensured they stopped checking my pulse. They took their eyes off me completely, allowing me to operate entirely in the shadows. With the $45 million now safely resting in my private, offshore accounts, it was time to deploy the heavy artillery. I did not want to simply expose Julian. I wanted to own him. I wanted to hold the physical deed to his ruin. Working discreetly through Marcus, we established a deeply buried shell corporation named Obsidian Asset Management. We then systematically approached the 3 major banks currently holding Julian's toxic commercial real estate loans. These financial institutions were desperate. Julian's debt was a bleeding wound on their balance sheets. When Obsidian Asset Management offered to purchase his combined $22 million in defaulted loans, the banks practically tripped over themselves to finalize the paperwork. We bought the debt for pennies on the dollar, a completely legal and ruthless corporate maneuver. Within 72 hours, the transaction was complete. The banks transferred the promissory notes, the collateral agreements, and the foreclosure rights directly to my shell company. Julian had absolutely no idea that the massive, suffocating mountain of debt threatening to crush his entire family was now legally controlled by his discarded wife. I was no longer just the mother of his children. I was his absolute largest creditor. I held the power to seize his business, auction off his properties, and foreclose on the very mansion he had locked me out of. But a trap is only effective if the prey walks willingly into the center. I needed to ensure that his billionaire lifeline, the Sterling family, was primed for the slaughter. I purchased an untraceable burner phone and utilized a highly encrypted messaging service to contact the lead counsel for Victoria's father. I did not send them the entire cache of evidence. That would be too obvious, too easily dismissed as a jealous ex-wife's slander. Instead, I operated like a ghost, dropping a single, highly specific breadcrumb. I anonymously forwarded a confidential internal memo regarding a denied environmental permit on Julian's flagship property, along with a polite suggestion that they verify the actual liquidity of his holding company before signing any binding financial commitments. It was just enough to ignite the natural paranoia of a ruthless billionaire. I knew Richard Sterling would quietly order his own forensic accountants to start digging. The fuse was officially lit. While the invisible net tightened around Julian, I focused on securing my true priority, my children. I abandoned the temporary luxury apartment and purchased a breathtaking, ultra-secure modern estate nestled high in the hills of Westlake, miles away from the superficial, toxic social circles my husband frequented. The property was hidden behind imposing wrought iron gates and surrounded by ancient oak trees. It featured a sprawling backyard for the twins, a private theater, and a state-of-the-art security system that made my previous residence look like a child's treehouse. I completely severed every physical tie to my past life. I changed my daily routines, enrolled the children in a prestigious private academy under my maiden name, and disappeared from the local radar entirely. As far as Julian and Beatrice knew, I was hiding in a cheap rental, crying over a divorce settlement. 2 weeks passed in absolute silence. Then, The inevitable invitation leaked through the high society gossip channels. Julian and Beatrice were hosting an incredibly lavish engagement party at the most exclusive private club in downtown Austin. The guest list included the absolute elite of Texas politics, real estate tycoons, and, of course, the entire Sterling family. It was designed to be Julian's crowning achievement, a public coronation where he would seamlessly transition from a failed developer to a billionaire's son-in-law, all while preparing to launch his political campaign on the platform of a devoted single father. They were celebrating their flawless, clean escape. They had no idea the executioner was already on her way. On the evening of the party, the Texas sky bruised into a deep, stormy violet. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my new master suite. Gone were the faded vintage tees and the exhausted, compliant posture of the woman Julian thought he knew. I wore a tailored, razor-sharp emerald green designer suit that radiated absolute authority. My hair was styled in a sleek, uncompromising cut, and a pair of diamond earrings caught the light with every slight movement. I looked exactly like what I was, a multimillionaire chief executive officer preparing to finalize a hostile takeover. I walked out the front doors of my estate and stepped into the back of a waiting, custom black luxury sedan. My private chauffeur closed the heavy door with a solid, satisfying thud. I leaned back into the pristine leather seats, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows as we merged onto the highway. The engine hummed a low, powerful note, carrying me directly toward the glittering ballroom where my husband and his mother were currently raising their champagne glasses. The chessboard was perfectly set. Every piece was exactly where I needed it to be. It was finally time to flip the table. The grand ballroom of the Austin Elite Club was a blinding display of excessive wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the sea of custom tuxedos and designer evening gowns. A string quartet played a soft, classical melody in the corner, entirely drowned out by the clinking of champagne flutes and the arrogant laughter of the city's most powerful people. I walked through the towering gilded doors with the heavy, unhurried steps of an executioner. The thick oak doors swung shut behind me with a resounding thud that seemed to echo through the massive space. It took exactly 10 seconds for the crowd to notice the shift in the atmosphere. The laughter closest to the entrance died down first, rippling outward until a heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the entire room. All eyes turned toward me. Standing near the massive ice sculpture at the center of the room, Beatrice was mid-laugh, holding a glass of vintage red wine. When she finally turned her head and locked eyes with me, all the color instantly drained from her aristocratic face. Her jaw went slack, and the crystal stemware slipped from her trembling fingers. The glass shattered against the polished marble floor, a sharp, violent sound that cut through the dead silence. Julian whipped around at the sound of the breaking glass. When he saw me standing there, radiating absolute confidence in my emerald suit, his initial shock rapidly warped into a mask of ugly, purple rage. He aggressively signaled to the 2 burly security guards standing near the perimeter. "What is the meaning of this?" Julian barked, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet hall. "Guards, remove this woman immediately. She is completely unhinged and trespassing on a private event." The guards took a heavy step forward, but they abruptly stopped when Marcus stepped out from the shadows of the foyer. Flanking my right side, Marcus was dressed in his sharpest litigator suit, holding a thick stack of legal documents stamped with the bright red seal of the Texas State Court. "I would highly advise against touching my client," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the calm, booming authority of a judge. He held up the primary document for the entire room to see. "Julian, you are officially served with an emergency federal injunction. As of 1 hour ago, every single personal and corporate banking account associated with your name, your holding company, and your mother has been completely frozen by court order due to massive financial fraud, severe embezzlement, and predatory lending violations." The whispers in the ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and frantic murmurs. Julian looked as though all the air had been violently punched out of his lungs. He stumbled backward, desperately reaching for Victoria, who was standing nearby in a stunning white engagement dress. "It is a lie," Julian stammered, his eyes darting frantically toward Victoria's father, the imposing billionaire Richard Sterling. "Richard, I swear, this is just a desperate stunt by a bitter, mentally unstable ex-wife." I ignored him entirely and walked straight through the parting crowd until I stood mere inches away from Victoria. She looked terrified, her eyes wide as she stared at me. I maintained a perfectly calm, neutral expression as I handed her a sleek black folder. "Victoria," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of malice. "Inside this folder are the certified, unredacted financial ledgers of the man you are about to marry. He currently owes $22 million in defaulted, high-interest loans. His business is entirely dead. Furthermore, there is a small digital audio player in the front pocket. It contains a recording of him and his mother explicitly discussing how they plan to use your father's capital to save their bankrupt lifestyle, while using my twin children as political props for his campaign." Victoria's hands shook as she opened the folder. Richard Sterling stepped forward, snatching the documents from his daughter. The billionaire scanned the first page, and the veins in his neck bulged with raw fury. He looked up, glaring at Julian with a gaze that could melt steel. "The engagement is completely cancelled," Richard thundered, his voice shaking the crystal chandeliers. "Every single dime of our investment commitments is officially withdrawn as of this exact second. If you ever come near my daughter again, Julian, I will personally ensure you are buried under a prison cell." Julian was openly hyperventilating now, his perfectly styled hair completely disheveled, the grand illusion he had spent years building crumbling to dust in mere seconds. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate realization. "You," he hissed, his voice trembling. "You leaked the environmental reports. You ruined everything. How did you even afford a corporate litigator like Marcus? You have absolutely nothing." I allowed a slow, devastating smile to finally cross my face. I turned slightly, addressing not just Julian, but the entire room of silent, captivated elites. "You and your mother always loved to remind me of my place," I said, my voice ringing clear and authoritative. "You called me a failed freelancer. You called me a liability. What you completely failed to realize was that my small side project, Novasphere Interactive, was just acquired by a global entertainment conglomerate for $45 million. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Beatrice gripped the edge of the ice sculpture table, her legs practically giving out. "But that is not even the best part. Julian," I continued, stepping closer so he could see the absolute ruin in my eyes. "Remember the shell company that bought up your $22 million in toxic debt last week? Obsidian Asset Management, that is my company. I am the sole proprietor. I am not just a multimillionaire. I am your absolute largest legal creditor. I currently hold the deed to your failing commercial properties, your vehicles, and the very mansion you locked me out of. First thing tomorrow morning, I am foreclosing on all of it." The sheer magnitude of his defeat finally broke him. Julian's knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the marble floor right in front of me in his custom tuxedo. He grabbed the hem of my suit jacket, his face stained with tears of absolute terror. "Kinsley, please," Julian sobbed, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "Please, do not do this. Think about our family. Think about the twins. They need their father. I made a mistake. Please forgive me." Behind him, Beatrice had completely dropped to the floor, weeping uncontrollably, the proud aristocratic facade completely shattered, babbling incoherent apologies to the empty air. I looked down at the man who had tried to erase my existence, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, profound contempt. "You stopped being their father the moment you decided to sell them for a campaign slogan," I stated coldly, pulling my jacket free from his desperate grasp. "You are not a father. You are just a bad investment." I turned my back on the pathetic scene. As I walked out of the ballroom, I saw the flashing red and blue lights of the economic financial police vehicles pulling up to the main entrance, ready to execute the warrants Marcus had prepared. I did not look back. I stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air, leaving the smoking ruins of their empire behind me, walking proudly toward a brilliant, entirely free future with my children. Thank you all so sincerely for listening to today's story. Where in the world are you currently listening from? If you found today's story engaging, please kindly help us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel to listen to the absolute best exclusive true stories that we cannot make public on YouTube. You can scan the Patreon QR code on your screen or use the Patreon page link in the description or the comments section of this video.